What's the fastest way to kill a gun that never actually snaps in half? Raw pressure, abrasive grit, salt corrosion, or plain neglect? The expensive mistake is buying off surface specs or internet hype, then discovering the real failure shows up as timing drifting, springs rusting, or cycling slowing down right when fouling and friction spike. This set of 6 is picked to answer one thing clearly: which designs were built around a specific collapse mode, and what that engineering buys you when the gun is dirty, wet, or run hard. The autopsy starts where the mechanical damage is most brutal: sustained Magnum pressure beating a revolver's lockup and timing until it goes loose. Then it widens to the opposite problem: a rifle that keeps feeding when debris and low maintenance would choke tighter systems. After that, the focus shrinks to pistols, where fine sand and saltwater attack small parts first, not frames, and where some smooth guns turn gritty fast. The point here is not romance or brand prestige. It is matching the design to the way reliability actually falls apart. Ruger Super Redhawk, chambered in .44 Magnum or .454 Casull, with cylinder capacity and overall dimensions varying by configuration and not specified in the provided source. Introduced in 1987, it uses an extended frame that runs forward past the cylinder, with integral scope mount cuts machined into that frame, plus a dual spring system designed to resist binding. The failure mode this gun is built to outlast is revolver shooting loose under sustained high-pressure recoil. Full-power Magnum use hammers the lockup surfaces, batters the crane and cylinder alignment, and accelerates end shake and timing drift on designs that do not have enough steel in the right places. The Super Redhawk's architecture attacks that directly. The massive extended frame gives more material to support the barrel and the front of the action, and the integral mounts remove a common secondary failure where scope bases and screws start walking under recoil. In the source, the .454 Casull load is described at about 65,000 pounds per square inch class pressure, and the whole point is that this revolver is built around tolerating that rifle pressure in a handgun reality without the usual mechanical loosening that shows up first as changing cylinder gap behavior, then as timing complaints. The source also claims ammunition manufacturers use Super Redhawks for proof load testing because they cannot blow them up, and that loads which would crack an end frame or destroy cheaper revolvers are absorbed here. Practically, you are paying for a durability hedge against the most expensive kind of handgun disappointment: the gun that still functions, but no longer stays tight, consistent, or trustworthy when fed the same full-power load it was bought for. New pricing in the source sits around $950 to $1,100 in .44 Magnum, and roughly $1,050 to $1,250 in .454 Casull. If brute force pressure is not what breaks your system first, the next threat is simpler: neglect and debris making a reliable gun suddenly stop. In 7.62 by 3.9, the WASR-10 is an AKM pattern rifle that feeds from standard 30-round steel magazines and uses a 1mm stamped receiver, a long-stroke gas piston, and a heavily chrome-lined bore. Expect utilitarian fit. The source calls out canted sights, rough machining marks, and bargain-grade wood. Accuracy is commonly treated as about a 4-minute of angle class expectation, which tells you immediately what this rifle is not trying to be. The durability story is in the parts people complain about. Sloppier internal tolerances are clearance, and clearance is how you keep a gun cycling when abrasive debris turns oil into paste. Mud, sand, and freezing slush have somewhere to go instead of wedging the carrier to a stop. The long-stroke piston adds momentum, and many examples are described as overgassed in the real world, which can look harsh on the bench, but buys you a bigger reliability envelope when ammo is underpowered, when the gun is dry, and when carbon is building. The source even frames the gas system as practically self-cleaning, because the gas block is blasting fouling as it runs. The stamped receiver's flex is also presented as part of the design language, a little compliance to absorb impulse instead of demanding tight, match-like fit to feel smooth. Then there's the ownership math. Field stripping is described as under 10 seconds, with few small parts to lose in dirt. Proud rivets are claimed to help water drain after flood or swamp exposure. A heavily chrome-lined bore is pitched as extra corrosion margin when shooting corrosive surplus, where the source's routine is blunt: water flush, then oil. Standard steel AK magazines are described as close to indestructible, which matters because a reliability problem is often a magazine problem. Price is market dependent, but the source pegs street cost around $1,070, with broader reality often spanning roughly $700 to $1,100. If your failure mode is neglect plus debris, the WASR is built to keep cycling anyway. Next, shrink the system. Pistols face the same grit problem, but with tighter spring-driven parts that corrode and drag sooner. In 9x19 with a double-action, single-action trigger, a full-size alloy frame, a solid stainless steel slide, and a nitron finish, the SIG Sauer P226 MK25 is built around a failure most pistols hide until they start feeling rough: corrosion and grit loading the small parts. Not some dramatic frame crack. The key detail is deeper inside. The internals and magazine springs are phosphate-coated, which matters because saltwater, sweat, and fine sand usually attack springs, pins, and contact surfaces first. That is how a pistol gets sluggish before it gets obviously broken. That architecture explains the MK25's reputation. The stainless slide and protective finish give the exterior more margin, but the real durability story is that the gun was positioned as the civilian twin of a sidearm chosen through harsh saltwater and sand testing. Fine debris in a pistol does not need to fully jam the action to cause trouble. It only has to add drag in the wrong places. Magazine springs lose force, controls feel gritty, slide movement slows, and reliability gets inconsistent with weak ammo or compromised lubrication. The MK25's coatings are aimed directly at that chain of failure. Add the P226's broad bearing surfaces and proven service size geometry, and recoil energy is spread through a system with a long record for staying functional under ugly environmental exposure. The double-action first pull is the trade-off, compared with a simpler striker gun, but the follow-up shots are crisp, and the platform is widely regarded as feeding varied 9mm loads well, from subsonic 147 grain to NATO ball and hollow points. In practical terms, this is not the cheapest way into a duty pistol. Standard models commonly sit around the $1,000 mark, and higher spec variants climb beyond that. But against other full-size duty guns like a Beretta 92, CZ75 pattern pistol, or even SIG's own more compact P229, the MK25 makes its strongest case when the environment is wet, sandy, salty, and maintenance may be delayed. If your pistol lives around boats, coastlines, harsh weather, or persistent grime, this is where the extra money buys a specific reliability hedge. And that sets up the next split perfectly. One pistol is optimized for the ocean, while the next one survives something even more common: ordinary neglect. The Glock 17 is a striker-fired full-size 9mm with a 4.49-inch barrel in the Gen 5 trim, a polymer frame, safe action with 3 passive safeties, and a dual recoil spring assembly style that is credited with smoothing slide tracking. It is also famous for having a very small internal parts count, commonly cited around 34 depending on how you count, which matters more than it sounds when the gun is running dry and filthy. Most mysterious pistol stoppages are not a single broken part. They are friction spikes. Fouling thickens, lubrication disappears, and grit turns bearing surfaces into sandpaper. The slide starts losing speed. The magazine spring is suddenly fighting a heavier drag cycle, and small timing windows get tighter. That is where the Glock's whole architecture buys time. The design is not trying to feel bank vault tight. The feed geometry is forgiving. The clearances are loose enough to shove debris out of the way instead of trapping it, and the polymer frame is tolerant of weather and solvents without quietly corroding under sweat or rain. You also do not have external manual safety levers to snag or pack with grime. The safety system lives inside the firing cycle. The recoil system is the known wear item, and Glock even recommends recoil spring replacement around every 5,000 rounds. But the durability story is that plenty of high-use rental guns keep going far beyond that, often past 20,000, because the core mechanism keeps functioning even as maintenance gets delayed. At roughly $539 for a new Gen 5, that is the value. An unflashy pistol that keeps feeding and cycling when nicer, tight-fit guns start to choke on their own friction. And that tees up the next failure mode. Not dirt that stops the slide today, but corrosion that quietly attacks the small parts over months you never logged. Smith Wesson Model 66 is a stainless steel K-frame 357 Magnum, introduced in 1970, commonly seen in 4-inch and 2.5-inch barrel lengths, and it is essentially the stainless counterpart to the blued Model 19. The point is not flash. It is material choice applied to the parts that actually decide whether the gun still feels tight after years of bad storage. The frame resists exterior pitting, and the internal parts are stainless or specially treated, with springs specifically described as resisting corrosion-related weakening. Corrosion is not cosmetic on a revolver. Rust adds drag before it causes a dramatic break. A roughened surface changes how smoothly parts reset, how consistently the action returns to battery, and how predictably the cylinder stop and timing events happen across a long day. Then, over months, spring steel that lives in humid air can lose strength and consistency, which shows up as sluggish return, inconsistent ignition energy, or a gun that slowly stops feeling normal, even though nothing is visibly snapped. The Model 66's stainless and treated internals are a direct hedge against that slow reliability leak, especially in rain, sweat, salt air, and holster neglect, where blued guns can quietly start a rust cycle under grips and in crevices. The source also credits its forcing cone with handling flame cutting better than carbon steel, which matters when the gun is actually fed full power loads instead of being babied. Practically, that is why the Model 66 developed a reputation with Marine units, police in humid climates, the Coast Guard, and even Alaskan guides. It is built for the places where your round count is not the only wear metric. Price-wise, 4-inch examples are often in the $750 to $900 range, with 2.5-inch guns commonly higher depending on condition and era. The next decision point is where corrosion resistance stops being enough. Strength means less if the action design will not stay in time without constant tuning. The Colt Trooper Mark III is a .357 Magnum service revolver, built around a shrouded ejector rod and a solid rib barrel, and the Mark III era starts with the 1969 redesign that shifted the Trooper line into a coil spring action. That matters because the durability problem that actually ends a lot of still intact revolvers is not the frame cracking. It is the action drifting out of time as wear stacks up in the lockwork surfaces that control cylinder rotation, bolt drop, and lockup. Colt's later move to coil springs and sintered iron internal parts is a plain, service-driven answer to that failure mode. Coil springs tend to hold their rate more consistently over long cycles, and the redesign pushes the gun toward parts that can be produced and replaced more predictably than older, more hand-fitted Colt systems. The implication is not that it makes the gun indestructible, it makes the wear curve less dramatic. Instead of living in a narrow, perfectly tuned or not right window, the Mark III concept is built to keep the timing events consistent longer, with less need for constant tuning just to preserve reliable lockup and repeatable trigger return. In practical terms, this is why the Trooper name shows up in duty contexts like highway patrol units and rural sheriffs in the source. It is a working .357 that prioritizes staying mechanically honest over being glamorous. It is also why it gets framed as Python DNA and accuracy at roughly half the price, even if today's used market still commonly sits around $700 to $1,300, depending on exact generation, condition, and completeness. The value case is straightforward. If you want a Colt pattern .357, you can actually shoot without treating timing like a fragile collectible. The Mark III's whole point is being the Colt that tolerates real round count ownership, because strength is wasted if the action will not stay in time. So here's the answer to that "what kills it first" question. Sustained pressure. Ruger Super Redhawk. Neglect and debris. Romanian WASR-10. Salt and fine grit. SIG Sauer P226 MK25. Ordinary, dry, and dirty ownership. Glock 17. Wet climate carry where rust quietly eats springs. Smith Wesson Model 66. And if you want a used .357, you can actually shoot without constant timing anxiety. Colt Trooper Mark III. Pick the design that matches your most likely failure mode, because choosing wrong costs reliability, money, and trust. What's in your holster? Let me know in the comments.